Many years ago, when I was about 18 and you might say didn't know any better, I jumped out of an airplane at 3,000 feet, not without a parachute. I did have a parachute, but I was by myself. This was back in the days before there was a thing called tandem jumping, where you go with somebody else sort of connected to you and who does all the heavy lifting in terms of opening the chute, etc. We were connected by a thing called a static line to the airplane, which is kind of a big long extension cord or a big long rope that opens the chute manually for you. I guess they had had enough experiences with people dying, getting too mesmerized or too spaced out or too something to bother to open the chute themselves, or they couldn't figure it out or whatever. I mean, you can visualize. But anyway, you might say I didn't have a safety net under me. I had 3,000 feet of air underneath me at that point, and it was quite an experience, actually quite an enjoyable experience. Not that I am in any rush to do it again, but it was a blessing in the sense that it just, when you stand on the step, I was the first one out of the plane. I sort of, my friends were eager to go in the plane, but they were not eager to be the first one out of it. And so I stood on the step. The plane slows down to about 70 or 80 miles an hour. It's just a small single engine plane. And there's this, you step out and then the wind hits you and there's kind of this moment of truth and you're looking at 3,000 feet of air between you and the ground. And you think, gosh, do I really believe that this is all going to work out okay? And then you jump, you're supposed to arch your back. In fact, they even tell you to yell, arch, arch. You're supposed to yell loud enough that they can hear you on the ground, which I don't know that I yelled anything at all except, ah! But it was a fascinating experience. Once the chute opens, it's beautiful. The first 125 feet or so before the chute is fully expanded and kind of catches, you're in complete free fall. And if you've ever jumped off of a high diving board or a high rock into a river, at which I have also done, it's quite a rush because you're accelerating faster and faster. But in real life, we don't typically accelerate for 125 feet without some kind of disastrous end at the bottom of it. But in the case of the parachute opening, it becomes very gentle at that point, very soft. It's very quiet. You're moving along with the speed of the breeze, which was very mild that day. Anyway, I tell this story because all of us at one time or another are faced with circumstances, with situations, with choices that we have to make in which there is no perceptible safety net under us. There's nothing that we're going to dive into that is going to save us outwardly. And I'll tell a couple of other stories on that same theme, but there's a point that I want to get to at the end of all that. The second of these was a singing tour that I was engaged in the winter of 1986. This was December of 1986, late November, and then most of December 1986. And a group of 4 of us were traveling around Southern California, singing Christmas music, wearing Victorian costumes, and we sang in churches, we sang in some clubs, we sang at Disneyland, we sang on John Davidson's yacht for a family Christmas party, which was quite an amazing experience. We sang for shopping malls all around the Los Angeles area, and there were 4 of us, 1 soprano, 1 alto, 1 tenor, and 1 bass. And which, if you do the math, you realize, then we sang 4-part harmony music, generally speaking. There were a few duets and trios, but for the most part, it was 4 parts all the way along. means that nobody gets to have a day off. I mean, we did collectively have a few days off, not very many. We were 21 engagements in 23 days, or 23 engagements in 21 days, anyway, something like that. It was a lot. We were very busy. Sometimes we had 2 and even 3 engagements in one day. So, there were a few times in there where we gathered up. I think we had 2 days, maybe 3 days off on the whole trip. But there was no safety net under us collectively. And if you think about that, we didn't have any backup singers. We didn't have anybody we could rope in who knew the music, who could just sort of appear and be part of the group. We had to make good music for an audience, for, in some cases, very discerning singers in the audience. And without any chance to sort of sort it out if there was a problem. It was interesting because when we started that trip, I had been sick in the week prior to us leaving. And in my young life at that point, I had not ever been sick for that long that I could remember. Maybe when I was a young child and I had the measles or, the chicken pox or something, some childhood illness like that. Maybe there was one that lasted that long. If so, I don't remember it. And I do remember this because I had a fever that wouldn't break, and I had this nagging, ticklish cough in the back of my throat. And I remember going to sing. We had one concert before we left Ananda Village, and we were singing in front of the whole community, which otherwise would have been a very inspiring experience, but for me was very nerve-wracking because I found that if I didn't place my voice just perfectly, I would start coughing. And you can't start coughing in the middle of a song. I mean, sometimes I could hold it, I could wait, and you'd feel this cough, this itch kind of creeping up your throat. And, it's this inexorable moment where you can't avoid it. You can't get out of it. And then at the end of the song, sometimes I'd burst out coughing. But there was this under it all. And the experience was wonderful. I have told this story before, but there was a concert we did for a church. And we had not explained beforehand that they could hold their applause until the very end of the concert. We just, every song they would applaud afterwards. We would sing Joy to the World. We would sing, O Come All Ye Faithful. We sang very traditional Christmas carols and Christmas music, and Swamiji's music, which of course would have been most unknown to them. And we came to one of Swamiji's Christmas pieces that is very unusual, Looking for a Friend. He does not ever name Christ. He names the circumstances around Christ's birth. So he talks about coming to Bethlehem. He talks about the shepherds. He talks about the wise men, you learned men. But it's always in reference to looking for a friend, looking for the truest friend in our lives. And at the end of that song, there was pin drop silence, just absolute stillness in the hall. Nobody moved. In fact, it was almost like nobody even breathed. And then afterwards, I think you could kind of feel people's thought. It was like they were deeply moved by the song. And then at the end of being deeply moved, they realized, oh my God, these guys might think we didn't like it. And so then they started clapping afterwards. But it was like nobody wanted for at least 5 or 10 seconds, which is a long time, if you're used to finishing a song and kind of getting immediate applause. There's this sense of, what are they going to do? But it was just this perfect stillness. And then, people expressed their gratitude in that way. That feeling, that gift, which came up in different ways many, many times during that trip, showed us that it was safe to go out on a trip in which we kind of had no safety net under us. The last story I'll tell is takes place about 20 years later. This was in 2000, late 2005 and then early 2006. And I had traveled to 4 major cities in India. And the first times that I went to those cities, I traveled with one other person. The first 2 cities were Chennai and Bangalore, and I traveled with one of our monks who was a wonderful fellow and, very charming and magnetic. His presence made it a little bit challenging in that he was charming and magnetic and seemed to magnetically attract about 10 or 15 adoring young women who were, eager to chat with him. And he was as I said, he was a good-looking fellow. And the young women seemed to be drawn to him eagerly. But anyway, we had amazing results. We had one of our programs, you might say, had been over-promoted, if such a thing is possible. In all the years that I've given talks around the world, I think that is the only, or the one of 2, where it was really, really promoted. And this guy in Bangalore, Hannah Meyer, really knew what he was doing. He really had the psychology of the people and how to approach it. And we had 250 people for a hall that only held about 75. And we tried to move the hall, move the venue at the last minute. That couldn't be done. So I ended up doing the same workshop twice on one day, on that Saturday. And I remember this feeling, again, returning to the no safety net. I was the speaker. This monk was the doing the books, taking the tickets, answering questions, helping people in whatever way he could. And later, on that same trip, we went to Calcutta and Mumbai. On those 2 trips, Haridas joined me, Acharya Haridas, and a beautiful results, and 250 people in Mumbai. But this time we had a hall that was big enough to hold all of them. But that feeling that, I could not be sick, I couldn't just not have something to say, or kind of run out of gas or anything like that. There was no room for error, and somehow in all of that was God's grace, was God's gift, God's blessing. And I say those things not because those are such extraordinary experiences. I mean, countless millions of people have done far greater things than those. I mean, anybody can jump out of an airplane, and hopefully they can, if they have a parachute and they know how to use it, they can live to tell the tale afterwards. It doesn't take any great talent. We trained a little bit. But all of us, every one of us in this world, will face situations. If no other, we will face the time when this body is ready to be shed, when it's time for us to leave this body. And it will feel very unknown. It will feel as if we have no safety net under us. We came alone, we're leaving alone. It may feel very, sort of frightening or whatever, at least unknown to us. And yet, Divine Mother is always with us, always holding us. We may not see her, we may not see or know or feel that presence, but ultimately we will. Ultimately, we will come to the point where we will know that truth which will make us free. We will know that presence of the divine inside of us, that we will realize it's as if we've been walking along. When you see a little kid walking, who's too small to be able to keep his arms down holding his parents' hands. He has to reach up, and they're sort of tugging him along, and he's holding one hand of each. Ultimately, we will realize that we have gone through life holding on to Divine Mother's hands. We may not remember it, we may not even be consciously aware of it, but we will ultimately realize that she has had hold of us. We can let go of her, But even when the kid lets go of mom's hand, she's usually aware on some level, on some intuitive level, of what the kid is up to and how close and what she can do if something comes up. So know that that reality lives inside and that sooner or later we will find it and we will know it for our very own.